The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and David stepped out, his briefcase in hand, the weight of the day already pressing on his shoulders. If you're ready to hear the whole story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let's get into it. He walked through the sleek, glass-walled hallway, the hum of office chatter fading into the background. But his heart wasn't in the office. Hadn't been for months. He glanced over at the glass-walled corner office at the end of the hall. She was in there, just beyond the door. Leah Mitchell, CEO. The woman who, despite her power, always made David feel small. Not because of her achievements, but because of the way she seemed to see right through him. And lately, the way she seemed to watch him. David slowed his pace, his mind racing. The last thing he wanted was a confrontation, but he could feel it coming. He always did. He had been avoiding her for weeks, ducking into meetings, taking the longer route to the restroom, hiding behind stacks of reports. But no matter how hard he tried, it felt like she was always one step behind. He paused by his desk, running a hand through his hair. It's just work. Just focus on the job. Don't let her get to you, he told himself. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just about work. It was the way she looked at him with those sharp, knowing eyes, as if she could tell there was more to him than what he let on. Just as he was about to bury himself in his inbox, the unmistakable sound of high heels echoed down the hallway. He tensed. Leah. He didn't need to look up to know she was walking straight toward him. The rhythm of her footsteps was too deliberate to ignore. She wasn't just passing by. She was coming for him. David looked up just in time to see her stop at his desk, her posture confident, but her gaze curious, almost piercing. David, she said, her voice smooth but edged with something else. Can I ask you something? He felt a flicker of panic. Sure, what's up? Her eyes didn't leave his as she leaned against his desk, folding her arms. Why are you avoiding me? The question hit him like a punch to the stomach. His breath caught in his throat. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. He hadn't expected her to confront him like this, not so directly, not with that calm certainty she always carried. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them felt thick, like the air before a storm. Leah raised an eyebrow. You've been dodging me for weeks, David, and I want to know why. David's mind scrambled for an answer. She can't know. She can't know what I'm running from. I'm just busy, he stammered, hoping she'd buy the excuse. She didn't. That's funny, Leah said, her voice low, almost teasing. Because you've always been busy. But I've never seen you avoid me like this. Something's different. The heat on the back of his neck crept up, and for the first time in ages, David felt like he was 16 again. Caught in a lie, trying to dodge a confrontation he couldn't escape. Leah waited for him to answer. But when he didn't, she stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. You've been running from something. I can see it in your eyes. And I think I'm the last person you want to talk to about it. David swallowed. She's right. But how could he tell her the truth? That he wasn't just avoiding her because of work. That he was avoiding her because the last thing he needed in his life was to get caught up in something he couldn't control. And yet, here she was, looking at him like she already knew everything. Leah, it's not like that, David finally said, his voice tight. I'm just focused on the job. That's all. She didn't smile, but he could see the corner of her lips twitch, as if she found his answer less than convincing. David, she said softly, you don't have to be so careful with me. I'm not your boss right now. I'm just asking you man to man. What are you avoiding? His breath hitched. The question stung. But before he could answer, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. One of his colleagues appeared in the doorway, eyes darting between them. Leah straightened up instantly, her professional mask sliding back into place. Let's finish this later, David, she said, her tone shifting back to business. She gave him a nod before walking away, her heels clicking steadily against the floor. David sat there for a long moment trying to breathe. The pressure in his chest was almost suffocating. Why did I just lie to her? Why can't I be honest? Leah's words echoed in his mind as he sat alone in his office that evening. The glow of his computer screen, the only light in the room. Why are you avoiding me? He couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop thinking about her. For the first time in a long time, David felt something shift inside him. A crack in the wall he had built so carefully around himself. She sees me. She sees me more than I want her to. And that thought scared him more than anything. But deep down, he knew the truth. The truth was that he hadn't just been avoiding her. He had been avoiding himself. But as he sat there in the dim light of his office, staring at the unanswered questions that haunted him, David couldn't shake the feeling that Leah was right about something. He was about to face something bigger than just a confrontation. And it was going to change everything. David barely slept that night. His mind raced between the echo of Leah's question and the crushing weight of the truth he wasn't ready to face. He had managed to avoid it for so long, pretended that everything was fine. But now, after that moment in the office, it felt impossible to ignore. He arrived at work the next morning in a haze. The usual hum of the office, the ringing of phones, the tapping of keyboards. It all felt distant. The whole world seemed to move in fast forward while he was stuck in a loop, replaying the same conversation in his mind. Why are you avoiding me? Why am I avoiding her? David kept asking himself. He didn't have an answer, at least not one he was ready to admit. The real question was, why had it taken him this long to realize the real reason he was running? Leah had walked out of his office so quickly the day before, but her gaze lingered. That question. It was like a spotlight that had pierced through the carefully constructed barriers he'd put up around his life. But he couldn't let her in. Not like that. Not now. He needed to focus. He couldn't afford distractions. But today, of all days, things felt different. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was from Leah. Leah, can we talk? I have a meeting in 20 minutes, but I need to speak with you first. It's important. He read the message twice, his heart suddenly beating faster. It's important? He hadn't expected that. The words felt heavier than they should have, and he couldn't figure out if they held the promise of a confrontation or something else. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his nerves. He couldn't keep avoiding her forever. Maybe this was the moment he needed to stop running from everything, including himself. 20 minutes later, David found himself outside her office, pacing in front of the frosted glass door. His breath quickened with every step. He didn't know why he was so nervous. Leah was just his boss, just the CEO. Why did her presence make him feel like everything in his life was about to be exposed? Taking a deep breath, he knocked once, then stepped inside before she could respond. Leah was sitting at her desk, her hands folded in front of her as if she'd been waiting for him. The sharp lines of her blazer seemed to match the intensity in her eyes. She looked different, less like a powerful CEO and more like a person who was about to confront something real, something personal. You wanted to talk? David said, trying to keep his voice steady. Leah didn't answer immediately. She motioned to the chair across from her, her gaze never leaving his. Sit down, David. He obeyed, the air thick between them. Her office felt suddenly too small, the walls pressing in, as if everything around them was about to close in on both of them. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, she said, breaking the silence, about how you're avoiding me, and I think I finally understand why you're doing it. David's pulse skipped a beat. You do. Leah leaned forward slightly, her eyes soft but determined. I think you're afraid. Not just of me, but of what being around me means. And I think you've been running from something inside you. You've been hiding it behind your work, behind your son. But I'm not going to let you keep running anymore. Her words hit him like a wave crashing over his chest. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. How could she see all of this? How could she know? David, you're not the only one who's been hiding, Leah continued, her voice steady but tinged with something softer. I know what it's like to put up walls, to bury what's really going on inside. But I can't help you unless you let me in. And I'm not just talking about work. I'm talking about what you've been carrying, what you've been avoiding for God knows how long. David blinked, suddenly feeling exposed in a way he hadn't before. The walls he'd spent years building came crashing down with a single sentence. It was like she had read the blueprint of his life and found all the fragile parts that even he hadn't been willing to face. "Leah," he whispered, his voice cracking. He didn't know how to answer her. What could he say? She was right. He had been hiding, not just from her, but from everything. From the fear that he wasn't good enough, from the guilt he felt for not being a better father, a better man. "I'm not asking you to let me in for your sake, David," Leah said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm asking you to let me in for your own sake, so you can stop running, so you can start being real, with yourself, and with me." For a long time, David didn't speak. He couldn't. His heart was pounding, and he could feel the weight of his own truth pressing on him. For years, he had been too afraid to admit it. He was terrified. Terrified of letting anyone close. Terrified that if he let go, even for a moment, everything would fall apart. He swallowed, his throat dry. "I don't know how to stop running." Leah didn't respond with words. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand on his, the gesture simple but grounding. In that moment, David felt the first stirrings of something unfamiliar. It wasn't a magic fix. It wasn't an answer that would solve everything. But it was a start. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It was calm. And for the first time in months, David felt something inside him soften. A tiny crack in the armor he'd spent so long building. But before he could say anything else, the door to her office opened, and one of her assistants walked in, interrupting the moment. Leah quickly withdrew her hand, clearing her throat and straightening up. "I'll be with you in a minute," she said to the assistant, before looking back at David. David stood up, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing. Things had changed. "You're not alone in this, David," Leah said softly. "And I'm not going anywhere." As he walked back to his desk, the weight of their conversation still hanging in the air, David realized that he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't walk away from anymore. The next step would be the hardest one he'd ever take, and it would change everything. David sat at his desk, staring at the blank screen in front of him, his mind a jumbled mess of thoughts. The buzz of the office, the constant hum of phones ringing and keyboards clacking, had never felt so distant. His hands hovered over the keyboard, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't focus. He couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Leah. "Why are you avoiding me?" Her words replayed over and over in his head. And now everything felt different. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure where to go next. The walls he had spent years building around himself, his work, his responsibilities, his son, felt fragile now. Like one wrong move and everything would crumble. David tried to shake the thoughts away, but they wouldn't leave. "I need to get back to work. Focus on the job. It's what I'm good at," he thought, his mind spinning in circles. But the next morning, as the sun rose and he dragged himself into work again, nothing had changed. The weight of yesterday still sat on his chest, and the questions were louder now. He walked into the office with his head down, avoiding the usual greetings from his colleagues. His mind wasn't on the reports in front of him or the presentations he had to finish. It was on Leah. He kept thinking about her eyes, soft but firm, asking him to stop hiding. But David wasn't ready. He wasn't ready to face it. He wasn't ready to admit what he knew deep down, that he had been hiding. He couldn't afford to let anyone in, especially not someone like Leah, someone so powerful, so confident. He couldn't risk it. His phone buzzed again, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was Leah. "Leah, we need to talk again. I know you're avoiding me, but it's time to stop pretending. Can you meet me after work today?" David stared at the message, his chest tightening. He wanted to say no. He wanted to ignore her, pretend nothing had changed. But he knew he couldn't. Later that evening, David stood outside the office building, his heart racing. His phone buzzed again. "Leah, I'm waiting for you in the conference room." He took a deep breath and walked inside. The lobby was empty, the usual bustle of the office quiet now. As he passed the glass walls of the conference rooms, he saw her, Leah, sitting at the table, her hands folded in front of her, waiting. Her posture was poised, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet resolve, a challenge. David paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For a moment, he considered walking away. He could turn around, leave, and pretend none of this had ever happened. He could stay hidden behind his walls, continue playing the role he had perfected for so long. But Leah was right. He couldn't keep running. Not anymore. He opened the door, and her gaze met his immediately. There was no small talk, no pleasantries. Just the weight of her eyes, waiting for him to take a seat. David sat down across from her, feeling the tension between them grow, like an electric charge in the air. "You're still avoiding me," Leah said, her voice calm but insistent. "I'm not avoiding you," David replied quickly. But even to his own ears, it sounded like a lie. He clenched his fists under the table, trying to keep his composure. Leah didn't react immediately. She just looked at him, her gaze steady. "Then why haven't you answered my question?" she asked softly. "Why are you avoiding me, David?" David's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to explain everything. The pressure of being a single dad, the fear that if he let anyone close, it would all fall apart. But the words caught in his throat. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I've just been scared. I don't know what you expect from me. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." Leah sat back in her chair, her eyes never leaving him. "I don't expect anything from you, David. I just want you to stop running." David looked at her, his breath hitching in his throat. Stop running. The words were so simple, but they hit him like a wave. He was running, wasn't he? Running from everything. From his past. From his fear. From her. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. David tried to look away, but he couldn't. Leah was right there, and for the first time he felt like she was seeing through him. "I can't just stop running," he said, his voice cracking. "If I stop, if I let go, everything will fall apart. My son, my job, everything I've built will just crumble." Leah leaned forward, her expression softening. "David, nothing is going to fall apart. You're the one holding it all together. But you're not meant to carry it alone." David swallowed hard. The thought of letting anyone else in, especially her, felt terrifying. He had spent so long building this life, keeping everything under control, never asking for help. The idea of letting someone see his weaknesses felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall. "I don't know how to be vulnerable," he whispered, the words barely leaving his lips. "I don't know how to let anyone see me like this." Leah's gaze softened even more, her voice low and steady. "You don't have to be perfect, David. You just have to be real. With me. With yourself." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. David felt the walls he had built around himself start to crack, just a little. But he wasn't sure if he was ready to let them come down completely. "I don't know if I can do this," he said, his voice filled with doubt. "You don't have to do it alone," Leah replied gently. "And you don't have to do it all at once. But you have to stop running. You have to start letting yourself breathe again, David." David sat there, frozen, the weight of her words heavy on his chest. For a moment he wanted to run. He wanted to escape, to hide from everything he felt. But as he looked at Leah, her eyes filled with something that was both understanding and challenge. Something shifted inside him. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it wasn't about control. Maybe it was about trusting that someone would catch him when he fell. As he sat there, caught between the fear of what might happen if he let go and the pull of something new, something real, David realized that everything he had built up until now had been based on one lie, that he could keep running. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he wanted to anymore. David didn't know what he expected when he walked into the office the next morning. But it sure wasn't the sight of Leah waiting for him outside his cubicle. Her arms crossed, a faint smile on her lips. The air between them had shifted. He could feel it in the way she looked at him. Less like the intimidating CEO, more like a woman who had seen the cracks in his armor and wasn't afraid to challenge him to fix them. "Morning," she said, her tone light but laced with something deeper. David nodded, suddenly unsure of how to act. He had spent the last few days trying to focus on work, avoiding any more awkward conversations. But now, here she was, standing right in front of him again, not letting him hide. "Got a minute?" she asked, her gaze steady. He hesitated. Sure. What's up?" She motioned for him to follow her. "I need you to come with me for a second. There's something I want to show you." David didn't argue. As much as he wanted to duck into his work and pretend things were normal, he knew this was inevitable. He was going to have to face this, whatever this was, sooner or later. They walked down the hall together, the silence between them almost comfortable now. David tried to focus on the rhythm of their footsteps, the buzz of the office around them, anything to distract from the unease settling in his chest. She led him into one of the conference rooms and closed the door behind them. The room was quiet, the only sound the hum of the air conditioning and the faint rustle of papers. "Sit down," Leah said, gesturing to the chairs around the table. "I need you to look at something." David lowered himself into the chair, his mind still racing. Was this about work? Was she going to give him another task, something to keep him distracted? But then she slid a folder across the table to him. He looked down at it, confused. "What's this?" "It's a proposal for the new project we've been talking about," she said. "The one I want you to help me lead." David furrowed his brows. "But I thought you already had someone for that." Leah shook her head. "I did. But after everything we've talked about, I want you to be the one. You've been avoiding this, David. You've been avoiding everything, your potential, your strengths. And I think it's time for you to face it." David felt a knot twist in his stomach. This wasn't just about a project. This was about something bigger, something that required him to take a step forward. And that was terrifying. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," he said, his voice low. "I have a lot on my plate already. With my son, my responsibilities." Leah leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I get that, but you can't keep using that as an excuse. We all have responsibilities, David. But we don't let them define us. You're more than just a dad or an employee. You're capable of so much more. But you have to choose to see that." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had heard them before. Maybe not in those exact words, but the meaning was the same. He had spent so long defining himself by what he could do, not who he could be. But Leah was right. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Leah didn't hesitate. "Because I believe in you. I believe you're ready to step up. But I can't make that choice for you." David sat back, running his hands through his hair. He wanted to say something. He wanted to tell her that he wasn't ready. But looking at her now, there was a quiet strength in her eyes. She wasn't pushing him. She was giving him the space to make the decision himself. For the first time in ages, he felt like he had a choice. Not just in this moment, but in everything. Leah stood up, walking around the table to stand beside him. "Take some time. Think about it. But don't wait too long." David looked up at her, feeling the weight of her words. Don't wait too long. He had been waiting for years, waiting for the right moment, the right time to take a chance. But there was no more time to waste. Leah paused for a moment, as if weighing something in her mind. Then she placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture so simple, yet it felt like it anchored him. "You've got this, David, but only if you stop running." With that, she turned and left the room, her footsteps fading down the hall. David sat there in silence, the proposal still in front of him. His hand hovered over it, but he couldn't bring himself to open it. He wasn't sure if he was ready. He wasn't sure if he could take the leap. But the seed had been planted. He couldn't hide from this anymore. As the day wore on, David found himself unable to focus. His mind kept returning to that moment in the conference room. Leah's words echoed in his head. "You're capable of so much more." But was he? He had spent so long convincing himself that he couldn't have it all, that his family needed him too much, that he couldn't balance work with everything else. And maybe that was true. but he didn't know if he could live with the idea of never even trying. Later that evening, after the office had quieted down and the last of the lights flickered off, David sat at his desk, staring at the proposal Leah had left behind. The words blurred together. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for anymore. He wasn't sure if he was afraid of failing or afraid of succeeding. But as the minutes ticked by, a new thought settled into his chest. Maybe it wasn't the project he was avoiding. Maybe it was the idea of facing what he was capable of stepping up and confronting everything he had been running from, his fears, his past, his future. As David stared at the proposal, his mind racing with doubt, he realized one thing. This decision wasn't just about the job. It was about him, and it was time to stop running. Once and for all, David had barely slept. The weight of the proposal Leah had given him weighed on his chest, and it seemed like everything in his life was pushing him toward a decision he wasn't ready to make. That morning, the office felt quieter than usual. The buzz of phone calls and the tapping of keyboards a constant reminder of the choice he had to face. He had spent most of the night thinking it over, going back and forth, wondering if he was really ready to step up, to face not just the project but everything that came with it, his life, his son, and the fear that had been sitting at the back of his mind for as long as he could remember. He thought about Leah, her words from the other day. "You're capable of so much more." They had echoed in his mind all night. She saw something in him that he wasn't sure he saw in himself. But maybe that's what scared him most. What if he wasn't enough? What if everything he touched fell apart? His phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was from Leah. "Leah, can we meet? It's important. Please." He stared at the message, his heart pounding. It wasn't just another work thing. He could tell. The urgency in her words. It hit him in a way that made his stomach twist. David stood up, his hands trembling slightly as he grabbed his jacket. He didn't even bother to stop by his desk. When he reached her office, Leah was standing by the window, looking out over the city, her arms crossed. The light from the setting sun caught her hair, making it look almost like it was glowing. She didn't turn when he entered, but he could feel her awareness of his presence. The air between them was thick, charged with an energy he couldn't ignore. He cleared his throat, unsure what to say. He wasn't sure if he was ready for another conversation like the one they'd had the other day. He had spent the morning convincing himself he wasn't ready to face this. But now, standing there, everything felt different. He was beginning to realize that avoiding it was making it worse. Leah turned slowly, her eyes locking with his. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him, like she was waiting for him to speak. Finally, David broke the silence. "What's going on, Leah?" His voice sounded different, smaller somehow, vulnerable. Leah took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving his. "It's about the project," she began. "But it's also about you." David flinched slightly at her words. "What do you mean?" She stepped forward, closing the space between them. Her eyes were intense, but there was something else there. Something softer. "I think you're scared, David. And I think you've been scared for a long time." His breath caught. It was like she had read the thoughts he hadn't even let himself acknowledge. "I'm not scared," he said, though he knew it wasn't true. It was a reflex, a defense. Leah shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You are, and it's okay. But it's not going to go away unless you face it." David looked away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The pressure in his chest was growing heavier with every word she spoke. "I've spent my whole life running," he muttered, barely audible. "From everything. From the responsibilities. From being a good father. From the idea of having more than what I already have." She tilted her head, her voice softer now. "But you don't have to do it alone, David. I'm not asking you to carry it all on your own. I want you to take this opportunity, not just for the project, but for yourself." David shook his head. "I don't know if I can. I've worked so hard to keep everything together. I don't want to risk losing it all." There it was, the heart of it. His fear of failure, of losing control. He didn't realize how tightly he had held onto it all until this very moment. Leah's expression softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to risk losing everything, but you do have to risk something. You have to risk letting go of the fear, letting go of the idea that you have to do everything alone. David swallowed hard, her words sinking in deeper than he wanted them to. I'm afraid, he whispered, more to himself than to her. I know, Leah replied quietly. But what if you stopped being afraid? What if you let yourself trust that you can handle it? That you can have both work, family, life. You don't have to choose between them. David looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust that this wasn't some kind of trick. But he wasn't sure. He wasn't sure if he could take the leap. You're asking me to do something I'm not sure I can, he said, his voice thick with uncertainty. I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for, Leah said. I'm asking you to believe in yourself, to stop running from the things you can control, and to take a chance on the things you can't. The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. The silence stretched between them, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was an invitation. David didn't know how long he stood there, his mind racing, but finally he nodded. I'll think about it, he said, his voice quieter than he intended. Leah smiled faintly, the warmth in her eyes unmistakable. That's all I'm asking. Just think about it. I'll be here when you're ready. That evening, after he left the office, David found himself driving aimlessly through the city, the streets blurring by in a haze. His mind kept drifting back to her words, to the weight of the decision that lay ahead. He pulled into a parking lot, turning off the engine but not getting out. The night was quiet, the city lights flickering in the distance. He didn't know what to do next. All his life he had kept his head down, working hard, keeping things together. But for the first time, David realized that he didn't have to keep running. He didn't have to keep hiding behind the walls he had built. He had a choice now. As David sat in his car, staring at the city lights, the weight of the decision ahead pressed on him. He couldn't keep running anymore. But what if he failed? What if everything he had worked for came crashing down? The answer wasn't clear. But one thing was, the time to decide had come. The next few days were a blur. David had kept his distance from Leah. After their conversation in her office, something inside him had shifted, but the fear was still there, tight in his chest. Every time he thought about taking the next step, the old doubts crept in. He had spent so long convincing himself that he had to hold everything together, that he couldn't risk it all. But Leah's words, "What if you stopped being afraid?" kept playing on repeat in his mind. What if he stopped being afraid? He couldn't answer that. Not yet. But he couldn't avoid it anymore either. David's office had never felt so small. The stack of papers on his desk, the blinking emails demanding his attention, it all felt like background noise now. His mind kept drifting back to Leah, to her insistence that he had more to offer, that he was capable of more than he had been giving. The truth was, he didn't know what to do with that. He didn't know how to stop being afraid, and he didn't know how to trust anyone enough to risk everything he'd built. But when his phone buzzed again, it was Leah's name on the screen. "Leah, we need to talk. It's important. Can you meet me tonight?" David stared at the message, his heart pounding. He had avoided her for days. Every time their paths crossed at work, he had kept things brief, professional. But this time, there was something different in her message. Something that made his stomach tighten with anticipation. The fear was still there, but so was something else. Something he couldn't ignore. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed a response. "David, I'll be there." Later that evening, David drove to Leah's office again, the familiar route now feeling more like a journey into the unknown. The city lights blurred as he passed, his mind racing. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. He hadn't made any decisions. Not really. But he couldn't stop thinking about the way Leah looked at him, the way she believed in him when he couldn't even believe in himself. When he arrived, he parked in the lot and walked toward the building. The quiet of the evening felt different tonight. There was a weight in the air, an expectation. He entered the building, then rode the elevator up to the top floor, where Leah's office was. When the doors opened, the hallway was empty. The usual noise of the office was gone. Everything felt still, like it was holding its breath. He knocked on Leah's office door before stepping inside. She was sitting behind her desk, her hands folded neatly in front of her, as usual. But there was something different in her posture tonight. She wasn't just the CEO. She was a person. Someone who had seen David at his most vulnerable and wasn't backing away. "Sit down," she said, motioning to the chair across from her. David sat, feeling the weight of the room settle in between them. His heart was still racing, his palms clammy. He didn't know what to expect, but he could feel that this conversation was going to be different. "I've been thinking about what you said," Leah began. "About being afraid. About not knowing how to stop running." David nodded, his throat dry. He had no idea where this was going, but he could feel the tension building in the room. "I get it," Leah continued, her voice steady but soft. "I've been there. I've run from things in my life too, things that scared me. I put up walls just like you. But eventually you realize that the walls don't keep you safe. They just trap you." David swallowed hard. He didn't know if he was ready for this conversation, but something inside him pushed him to listen. "David," Leah said, her voice softer now, "I'm not here to push you. I'm not here to tell you what you should do. But you have to stop hiding. You have to stop running." David opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, he just sat there, staring at her, feeling like the weight of everything was crashing down on him. Leah leaned forward, her gaze intense but kind. "You're afraid of failing, aren't you? You're afraid that if you step into this, you'll lose everything. But what if you're already losing it by not trying? What if this fear is keeping you from everything you want, everything you deserve?" David felt like the room had gone quiet. Her words were sharp, cutting through the fog of doubt in his mind. The fear had always been there, but it hadn't felt this real before. "Not like this. I'm not sure I can do this," David whispered, his voice cracking. "I've worked so hard to keep everything in place. If I take this risk, if I let go of the fear, I don't know what will happen. What if I can't handle it?" Leah's eyes softened. "I'm not asking you to do it alone, David, but you have to take that first step. You have to trust that you can handle it, even if it's hard, even if you fail." David stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in deeper than he thought possible. He wanted to say something, but his throat felt tight. The idea of failing, it terrified him. But Leah was right. Not trying, not stepping forward would be worse. Leah took a breath, leaning back in her chair. "I'm giving you the space to figure this out, but don't wait too long. You can't keep running forever." For a long moment, David didn't speak. He was wrestling with something inside him, something that had been there for years but had never been this loud. The fear, the doubt. It was all there, swirling around him, begging him to stay where it was safe. But another part of him, something smaller but stronger, was telling him it was time to move. It was time to stop hiding. David stood up, his legs unsteady, the weight of Leah's words still pressing on him. The door was open. The choice was his. But as he walked toward the door, he realized he wasn't sure if he was walking toward freedom or toward a fall. David's hands trembled as he stepped out of Leah's office, his mind racing. He had walked in expecting another conversation, another challenge to face, but this was different. Her words had dug deeper than anything before. He kept walking down the hall, his shoes clicking against the polished floor. He didn't know where he was going. The weight of Leah's challenge, "You can't keep running forever," pressed on him like a heavy hand on his chest. He wasn't sure how to make a decision like this. The elevator ride down felt like it lasted forever, the numbers on the display ticking by in slow motion. When the doors opened, David stepped out into the empty lobby, the quiet of the building swallowing him whole. The world outside seemed so far away. As he stepped into the parking garage, David's phone buzzed again. It was a message from his son, Tyler. "Tyler, are you coming home soon? I need you." David's chest tightened. He glanced at the message, feeling a wave of guilt wash over him. He had been so wrapped up in his own mess, his own fears, that he hadn't been present for the one person who needed him the most. his son. He had been so focused on running from his own uncertainty that he had almost forgotten to show up for Tyler. But the truth was, Tyler wasn't asking for him to be perfect. He just needed his dad. David stood there in the middle of the garage, his hand still clutching his phone, realizing that the moment Leah had called him to stop running wasn't just about work. It was about his whole life, the fear of failure, the walls he had built to protect himself, and the way those walls had kept him from everything he truly cared about. He couldn't keep hiding. Not from his son, not from Leah, and not from himself. He got into his car, his hands still shaking, and drove home in silence, the weight of everything pressing on him, making every mile feel like it stretched on forever. At home, Tyler was waiting for him by the door, his face lit up with a smile that tugged at David's heart. The little boy had been through so much already. David had been there for him, but he hadn't been present. Not the way Tyler needed. He hadn't been really there emotionally, because he had been too afraid to face his own feelings. "You okay, Dad?" Tyler asked, his small voice breaking through David's thoughts. David knelt down to his son's level, feeling his heart ache. "Yeah, buddy. I'm just trying to figure things out." Tyler's eyes narrowed, but then he smiled again, the simple innocence of his face breaking through the fog in David's mind. "I know you'll figure it out. You always do." David closed his eyes for a second, taking in his son's words, letting them sink deep into his chest. "You always do." Tyler didn't need him to have all the answers. He just needed David to show up, to be present, to stop running from the tough stuff. And for the first time, David realized that the only way he was going to stop running was if he faced everything. His fear, his work, his past, and stopped holding back. He pulled Tyler into a hug, the warmth of his son grounding him in the moment. It wasn't just about the project. It was about his family, his future, the things that really mattered. Later that night, as David lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind wouldn't stop. The fear, the doubt, the questions, they were all still there. But there was something else now, a quiet resolve. Something that had been buried under layers of excuses and distractions for far too long. David knew he couldn't make this decision based on fear. He had to make it based on what he wanted for himself, for his son, for his life. He had spent too long convincing himself that if he stayed hidden, he could keep everything under control. But now he understood. The only thing holding him back was the fear of not trying. He sat up in bed, his mind racing with possibilities. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew that if he kept running, he would never find out. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to do it all alone. The next morning, David woke up early. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft golden light over the room. He didn't know exactly what he was going to say to Leah when he saw her, but he knew he had to say something. He couldn't keep avoiding her. He couldn't keep avoiding himself. As he got ready, he checked his phone again. Leah had messaged him in the night. "Leah, are you ready to stop running yet?" David stared at her words for a long moment, and then, without hesitation, he replied, "David, I'm ready." David drove to the office, each mile feeling like a weight lifted. When he arrived, he went straight to Leah's office, his heart pounding in his chest. He knocked on her door before stepping inside, trying to steady his breathing. Leah looked up from her desk, and for a moment, their eyes met. There was something in her gaze, something knowing, something that told him she had been waiting for this moment. David took a deep breath. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm but filled with vulnerability. "I'm ready to stop running." Leah's lips curled into a small smile, and she stood up, crossing the room to meet him. "I knew you'd get here. I just didn't know when." David smiled back, but there was no trace of the fear that had been there before. He felt different now, lighter. He wasn't running anymore. "Let's do this," he said, and for the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone in the fight. As David stood there, finally stepping into his own truth, he realized that the real challenge wasn't the project, or even his fears. It was allowing himself to believe that he was worthy of everything that was waiting for him. Love, success, a future. The hardest part was over. But the journey was just beginning. David stepped into the conference room, his heart beating in time with the rhythm of his footsteps. Everything felt different today. Lighter, clearer, as if a weight he hadn't even known he was carrying had finally been lifted from his chest. Leah was already there, standing by the large glass window, looking out at the skyline. The city seemed to stretch on forever, just like the possibilities that lay ahead for them. She turned when she heard him enter, and for the first time in weeks, there was no tension in the air between them. No unspoken words. No walls. David smiled, his chest swelling with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. Morning, Leah said, her voice warm. Morning, he replied, his voice steady but softer than usual. She gestured toward the chairs around the table. You ready to dive in? David didn't sit. Instead, he walked toward her, standing side by side as they looked out over the city together. He could feel the steady hum of energy around them, the promise of something new on the horizon. He turned to her, meeting her gaze. I'm ready, he said, his voice filled with certainty. I've been ready for a while. I just didn't know it until now. Leah's eyes softened, and she nodded. I'm glad you're here. There was something in the way she said it, something that went beyond the professional, beyond the task at hand. It was the warmth of someone who had stood beside him, believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision he had made settling into place. He had chosen to stop running, to face what terrified him, and now here he was. Not just in the office, not just at a crossroads, but standing next to the woman who had challenged him to change, to grow, to live. The project they had started was no longer just a work assignment. It was a reflection of something much deeper, something that went beyond the spreadsheets and meetings and deadlines. It was about taking risks, about believing in the future, about stepping into something new. David glanced over at Leah again, his thoughts drifting back to their first conversation. The one where she had seen something in him that he couldn't even see in himself. You were right, he said quietly. I couldn't keep running. I kept telling myself I wasn't ready, that I couldn't handle it. But now I know. I was just afraid. Leah didn't speak right away. She just watched him, her gaze unwavering, as if waiting for him to finish. I was afraid that if I tried, if I stepped up, I'd lose everything. But now I see that hiding from it was costing me more than I ever realized. I was losing more by not trying. Leah reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but reassuring. You didn't lose anything, David. You just needed to see what you were capable of. And now I think you know. David felt a smile tug at the corners of his lips, but it wasn't just relief he was feeling. It was something stronger, something that felt like a weight had been lifted from his chest. Hope. The word echoed in his mind, louder than anything else. I know, he said quietly. And I think I'm ready for whatever comes next. They stood there for a long moment, the city stretching out before them like an open road. The uncertainty was still there. David would never be someone who had all the answers. But he had finally stopped running from the unknown. He had finally chosen to face it. Later that afternoon, David and Leah stood together in the lobby as employees gathered around, excited about the new project that was about to unfold. The team was ready to move forward, ready to take the next step, just like David had. As they shook hands with the members of the team, David realized that he wasn't just stepping into a new chapter in his career. He was stepping into a new chapter of his life. He had always been defined by his responsibilities, his role as a father, as an employee. But now, for the first time, he was learning to define himself by who he was becoming. Not by what he had been, but by what he was ready to embrace. That night, as David drove home, the familiar streets of the city felt different. He didn't feel weighed down anymore. His heart was light, his mind calm. And when he walked through the door and saw Tyler waiting for him, that same weightlessness settled deeper inside him. Hey, Dad, Tyler said, running to him with a big grin. I missed you. David knelt down and scooped him up into his arms, feeling the warmth of his son against him. Tyler had always been his anchor, but now David realized that he was finally learning how to be his son's anchor too. I missed you too, buddy, David whispered, kissing the top of his son's head. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't always here. But that's going to change. Tyler smiled, his small hands gripping David's neck as he squeezed him tighter. I knew you'd figure it out, Dad. David's heart swelled in his chest. The words were simple, but they hit harder than anything else. He had spent so long feeling like he wasn't enough, like he was always falling short. But in this moment he realized he was enough. Not because of the things he could do or the risks he'd taken, but because he had finally learned how to be present. He wasn't perfect, but he was here, and that was enough. The next morning, as David sat at his desk, the glow of the morning sun pouring through the window, he couldn't help but think back to everything that had led him here. The fear, the doubts, the hesitation. All of it had been part of the journey. And now, as he looked ahead, he felt a new sense of possibility. For the first time in a long time, David didn't feel afraid. He felt alive. Leah stopped by his desk later that morning, her usual confident smile in place. "How's it going?" she asked, her eyes glinting with that same challenge she had given him months ago. David looked up at her, a smile of his own tugging at his lips. "It's going better than I expected," he said. "Thanks to you." Leah raised an eyebrow, a teasing glint in her eyes. "I didn't do anything. You did it all yourself." David shook his head. "You gave me the push I needed. You helped me see what I was capable of." For the first time, Leah's smile softened. There was something in her eyes that David couldn't quite place. But he didn't need to. They didn't need words anymore. Not to understand what had happened between them. They had both changed. And that was enough. As David looked at Leah, something unspoken passed between them. A quiet understanding. This wasn't just about the project anymore. It wasn't just about work. It was about the transformation they had both gone through. The walls they had built. The risks they had taken. The possibilities they had finally chosen to embrace. They were no longer afraid of what the future held. Because they knew, now that together, they could face anything. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.